Well, Kamala Harris has selected her VP. Just keep in mind that nobody actually really selected Kamala Harris, at least not voters. But she has selected her VP. And honestly, everyone at this table is a little shocked. We're a little shocked by this because typically when you select a VP candidate, the biggest question that you're trying to ask is, does this person bring a state? Does this person bring a particular demographic? Like what is the importance of this vice presidential candidate? How does it positively impact your race? And we all thought she was going to pick Shapiro. But she didn't. She picked Tim Walz, not Waltz, Tim Walz, governor of Minnesota. And it just, I don't know, it seems a little weird. It seems a little weird. Or was it? Or is there actually a method to the madness? Is there some strategic reasoning for why Tim was selected? We're going to be discussing all of that and more. And we're going to get to the bottom of who exactly is Tim Walz. What does he believe? How could we potentially expect him to govern as a vice president, which honestly doesn't do much, or a potential presidential candidate one day? How is he going to influence the administration? Well, we're going to look at his past record as governor, as a congressman, and we're going to ask that question. All of that and more coming up on this episode of Making the Argument. I am your host, Nick Freitas. With me in the studio, my beautiful bride, Tina, Queen of the Bees.
Hello, everyone.
And then, of course, we have our political prognosticator and resident historian, Christian Hines. How you doing, Christian?
I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm doing all right. All right, let's go ahead and jump right into this. All right, why do you like? What are the criteria that you look for in a vice presidential candidate? Now, if you're on the outside looking in, you're probably thinking, well, I want someone that is either going to, help with the administration, or maybe they have a lot of administrative experience or executive experience. Maybe it's somebody that could legitimately, no kidding, do this job as president if something should happen to me as the president, right? It could be all of those things. But yeah, it's none of that. It's not what it really is. Because if you look at it, John Adams kind of said it best. He thought that the office of vice president was one of the dumbest offices ever conceived of by the minds of man. Why? Because there's really only kind of three functions, two functions and one backup function. You preside over the Senate, which none of them do. Right? You vote in case there's a tie in the Senate, which almost never happens, and you check on the daily health of the President of the United States, which somebody else does for you, right? So that's what you do, right? And then if something happens to the president, obviously you got to step into that position, which also almost never happens. So not a lot for the vice president to do, which means when a president is looking at a vice presidential candidate, they are trying to shore up a portion of the party or the electorate that they think they need, and so they select someone based off of that criteria. So to give you an idea, when Ronald Reagan got the nomination, he chose George Bush. George Bush and Ronald Reagan were not on the same sides of the Republican Party. Reagan was kind of seen as the outsider, the rebel, the person that had, almost got the nomination instead of Gerald Ford, right? All of these things. He was considered too radical by the Republican establishment. And so picking George W. Bush was a way of signifying, or H.W. Bush was a way of signifying that, oh no, we're a Big Tent party. We're going to, bring everybody in. You saw something similar, believe it or not, when Barack Obama chose Joe Biden. It was the idea of the person that had been in government and been in the federal government many years and could provide some insight and connections. And
basically your establishment pick.
Right? And then when you saw Trump the first time where he picked... Mike Pence.
Mike
Pence, thank you. He picked Mike Pence because there was a lot of social conservatives. There was a lot of pro-life conservatives. There was a lot of, Christian conservatives that were a little bit worried about Donald Trump's background, his history, his kind of issues with his marriage and women.
So he picked somebody nice and even keel. Trump was a little bombastic, right? People were having a hard time with that. So he picked somebody that could kind of cool the temperature a little.
He was kind of seen as an elder statesman. And it was. And again, a lot of this was built on the idea of, look, we've got some people within our own party, or we've got a strategic state in play, and we need to pick somebody that's going to help either bring those voters into the camp or is going to bring like a key state with them, or perhaps a lot of like money, whatever it is.
Well, we thought that she would want to shore up the pro-Israel vote because of how much the left has become like Jew-hating racist. And so we thought, she's going to try to shore up her Jewish vote.
No, I didn't think that at all.
and get Shapiro. But then Shapiro ends up sort of unjewing himself, like going out there and proclaiming that he no longer believes any of this, and like whatever.
Okay, let's be fair. It's not that Josh Shapiro didn't go out and claim, I don't believe in any of this anymore. What he did, it's not like he renounced Judaism. What he did was he took back, he had some statements from college or whatnot where he talked about something that I largely believe is true.
And then he renounced that.
Well, but let's talk about what he actually renounced, so that's why everybody knows. Like what he renounced was a statement where he basically said, look, peace in the Middle East is almost entirely dependent on Palestinians and Arabs in the area accepting the fact that Israel is going to exist as a state, right? And if you accept that, then there can be peace. We can work it out. But they're going to have to not engage in aggression and violence. He had to renounce that. Mm-hmm. And then he had to like heavily criticize Israel. I think Kamala saw him being Jewish as a liability for her, which tells you a lot about what the modern Democratic Party is. No, what she needed was Josh Shapiro, arguably by Democratic standards, is a moderate. He is someone that, like, for instance, he's not openly hostile to things like school choice. He's not, even though he's definitely, not a hard on crime guy. He's not as soft on crime as a lot of other people within the Democratic Party is. And he's popular in Pennsylvania, which is a must-win state for
That's
Kamala
the
Harris.
reason that he was considered in the first place. I don't actually think it was to shore up the Jewish vote. That at the end of the day, it's
she had so much going on where people were starting to Jewish folks were abandoning. They were jumping ship on the Democrats.
That's actually not true. The polling is very clear on that. Unfortunately, Jewish voters are the second most loyal Democratic base alongside black voters.
Right. And they
nothing changed on.
You were starting to see prominent Jews in the United States jumping ship. Pretty prominent folks.
I think that the danger that she had.
Wait a second. Okay. First of all, everyone's talking over each other. So go ahead and say your point.
The danger that she had was not that she was losing the Jewish vote. The danger that she had was that she was losing Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has 19 electoral votes. And that is the state that will ultimately probably decide the presidency. It is the new Florida. And the reason that Shapiro was in the running in the first place is because he most likely, I still believe this is true to this day, I think he would have delivered Pennsylvania to Harris because he has something like a 60% approval rating. He's, by the standards of the modern Democratic Party, a compromise builder and a moderate. He has not just supported school choice. And again, I'm not trying to defend the guy. I would never vote for him. But he has not just defended school choice. He also fought to like lower the corporate income tax in Pennsylvania at the same time that he tried to raise the minimum wage. He loves doing these things where he's trying to like compromise with something, right? Like, I will raise this tax here, but I will cut this thing here. And sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. But he's painted an image of himself as being a very eloquent moderate who's able to connect with voters. And he won his election for governor in a landslide. Now, he fought against arguably a weaker Republican nominee, but even today, he has something like a 60% approval rating. All of those things point to the idea that he could have delivered Pennsylvania. The problem was not just the fact that he's Jewish. The problem is that he comes across as too ambitious. He put out a campaign video in collaboration with other Pennsylvania state Democrats, such as the mayor of Philadelphia, promoting the idea that he was already picked as the vice presidential nominee, and then that was leaked to the public 3 days before the presidential candidate, before Kamala Harris had chosen her vice presidential nominee. That put Harris in a terrible position because it made it look like that he was upstaging her. You do not want to be upstaging your presidential nominee as the vice presidential candidate. I think that the problem that Shapiro had was not that he was Jewish. I think the problem that he had is that he upstages Harris. He outshines Harris. He is better. He's more eloquent than Harris, and he's able to build a coalition that is broader and has more appeal, especially in the Rust Belt, than Harris. That doesn't look good to Harris.
Okay, that might all be true, but the fact that you're saying that, I don't think you can honestly say that the Harris campaign was not concerned about the Jewish component of this. I'm not saying it was necessarily the primary factor. I'm saying that when I see like CNN strategic analysts after CNN strategic analysts come in and be like, well, this could be a problem with certain demographics within the Democratic Party, not to mention the fact that a component of their radical base, especially on universities, was just going nuts over this. So I'm not saying it's the primary factor. I'm also not going to concede that it wasn't a factor at all. I do think Harris is weak enough that where she does not want to pick some. This is another question that always gets brought up, right? A lot of time presidents don't like to pick somebody that they think could potentially upstage them. Now, I would say that I think Trump picking J.D. Vance, he actually picked somebody that in many respects, when it comes to being able to articulate points, when it comes to being able to get out there and speak, everything else, he picked somebody that actually could be very formidable on the stage.
Well, I think that's kind of how Trump is, though. He doesn't like losers. So he doesn't want somebody that's a loser on a ticket with him. And I know that sounds crazy, but then there's also the idea that J.D. Vance was kind of assassination insurance.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he is a lot younger. He is a lot, what is
well,
it, like
younger.
He just turned 40 a few days ago.
Younger, articulate, well-spoken, and can, present ideas in the right way with the right amount of force. Like President Trump's big shtick is that he's super blunt. He's kind of a hammer, you know what I mean? And he just says what he wants to say, and that's that. Well, I noticed that J.D. Vance does the exact same thing, but he maybe presents it a little bit better, actually.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, at the end of the day, you should be, regardless of the political concerns, you should be picking somebody that actually can operate in the clutch. And that's not just true of vice presidential candidates. That's true of your beard, of your razor. That's true of the various products that you use to make sure that you are clean and smelling wonderful. And the sponsor of today's show, Jeremy's Razors, does just that. Now, we've talked a lot about beard care for obvious reasons. We've also talked a lot about the quality of their new blades, which you need to go and check out. But today, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the other products they have, namely their shampoo, body wash, and deodorant. Because, guys, I'm going to tell you right now, there have been some weird trends going around on social media where women have actually kind of complained about men's grooming. And I'm going to tell you right now, when you get up there and you want to look good, you want to look presentable, you need to make sure that you're doing it with the proper products, man. You don't want stuff that's filled with a bunch of like crappy preservative. Like, why do they even put aluminum in deodorant? I don't even know why this is a thing, but you know who doesn't? Jeremy's. Jeremy's doesn't. So you can go on to jeremy'srazors.com. Use promo code Nick. You're going to get 15% off your order. And not only can you get the razors and all the stuff that you need for your luxurious beard, but you're going to get everything else you need too to make sure that you're clean and smelling minty fresh. I can tell you right now, I've used the shampoo and the body wash. It is stellar stuff. You know how I know? Because my wife likes it, and that's what I'm telling you guys. When it comes to your beard, when it comes to all, yeah, sure, it's for you, right? It's for you. Make a statement. Make a statement with that facial hair or lack thereof, but it's also for the ladies. Let's be honest. Jeremy'sRazors.com, promo code Nick, get 15% off. Order that shampoo, that body wash, and that deodorant to go along with all of your other beard and razor accoutrement. All right, let's go ahead and
that
jump
was a
into
good
it.
ad transition.
Yeah, it was. You're welcome,
their shave
America.
cream, when we were filming that hilarious commercial, when I used that shave cream on you, it smelled so good.
She just wanted to kiss me. Couldn't keep her hands off me, people. That's what I'm talking about.
If you haven't seen that, you're talking about the wedding one, right?
Yeah.
Go on Nick's Instagram after you're done watching this podcast and check it out.
It was good.
Hilarious.
It was good.
It was a good
my
video.
daughter and Tina got to be involved, and that was great. So listen, I want to jump ahead there. So we've talked a little bit about Josh Shapiro, how we all thought he was going to be the pick, mainly because Pennsylvania is so critical to both campaigns, but I would argue especially to the Harris campaign. There's hard to see any path to victory for the Harris campaign without Pennsylvania. The question is, okay, why Tim Walz? Like, why the governor of Minnesota? Minnesota's not in play. Minnesota was one of the only states that voted for Walter Mondale. I take that back. It was the only state that voted. Ladies and gentlemen, Massachusetts, California, Oregon, right? Like, name a liberal state voted for Ronald Reagan. But not Minnesota, baby. No. They stuck with their little liberal progressive. Now, Walter Mondale was from Minnesota, so that obviously.
And he only won by like 3,000 to 4,000 votes.
Yeah, that factored in. But the bottom line is that Minnesota has been reliably reliably in the Democrat camp, I think since Eisenhower?
Since 1972.
72,
it is
okay.
the longest streak of voting for a Democrat nominee for president of any state in the country. Because
Any state. So it's
Richard Nixon was the last one in 1972 to win it.
Okay, and that was because
He won everything. Other than Massachusetts
and DC, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, so massive. So it's not again. So again, if you look at the various criteria, you're going to bring a state, you're going to bring a demographic, you're going to bring a lot of money. What is it that you're bringing? Well, it ain't a state, right?
Well,
That's actually not entirely true, believe it or not.
Well, wait. I'm about to finish the thought.
I know, and I'm about to refute you. To just play devil's advocate for a moment.
Christian's been doing this all morning. He's super contentious today.
Go for it.
I see. I don't know why you guys think that. I'm just acting. I am who I am. Okay, so here's the deal. Remember when we did that episode where we talked about election predictions, where we talked about like polling where we think states are going to be, and at some point we're going to have to do a redo of this because, spoiler alert, the Democrats ain't running Joe Biden anymore, right? So when we got to Minnesota, I remember I pulled up like the trend line. Minnesota used to be a deep blue state, as we just talked about, right? Voted for Walter Mondale, hasn't voted for a Republican since Richard Nixon. It's been 50 years. But the trend in Minnesota has been to move to the right over the last 20 to 30 years. And polling in Minnesota had been quite close between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. So by picking Tim Walz, what you've done is arguably you have taken a state that is an absolute must win. I mean, if a Democrat is losing Minnesota, you are losing the White House. You've taken a state that is a must win, and you've hopefully taken it off the board as an additional emerging toss-up state that Trump can target. Okay, so that's the devil's advocate argument for shoring up a defense.
So now I'm gonna disagree with you.
Okay.
I don't think Trump's winning Minnesota. I know it's trending maybe in more of a positive direction than it has in the past. The other thing I will say is that if you're in a situation where you're a Democrat and you've got to shore up Minnesota, you're in trouble.
Well, we already know they're in trouble.
You're in trouble. Well, you're in a lot more. Look, I remember like 5 seconds ago when Josh Shapiro was still there, you're like, oh my gosh, we're going to lose if she picks Josh Shapiro. All right, now you're talking about, well, she had to shore up Minnesota.
Well, I did think we were going to lose with Shapiro. Well, I'm glad that she picked Walz.
My point is that's kind of a big flip there. Like I don't think Minnesota's in play. I wish that it was. I don't think it is. I don't think they picked Walz for Minnesota. I think in the mind of the modern left, Walz is the guy that's going to really appeal to the middle-class white working voter. And
with
why
the
do
camo hat and everything.
And why do I say that? Because they say it. Let's go ahead and look. I got an article right here. I'm just going to read it off. It's not up there. It's a different one. It says, he hunts, he fishes. You want to have a beer with him, said the source familiar with Walz's meeting. He will play in Michigan, Wisconsin, Western Pennsylvania, Georgia, and North Carolina. A longtime Democratic operative who has known Walz for years agreed, saying he talks and looks like a lot of the voters we've lost to Trump. By Tuesday, staffers at the Harris campaign headquarters were already joking about the blue Walz, referring the key Midwestern battleground states that they hope he will lock up. Here's another one. One of the key developments in Midwestern politics in recent years has been the shift of some white working class and male voters from Democrats to Republicans. I wonder if that has anything to do with the left constantly telling white middle class male white middle class males, you suck, you're the patriarchy, and you're the cause of all the problems within the universe.
I love the way that they articulated that, as if this was not a tectonic event that has taken place. Instead, they're like, this is a thing that has been playing out in some cases with some... No, this has been a massive en masse shift towards the right from this demographic that realizes that the Democrats despise them. They hate them. Yeah. The Democrats literally use straight white male as an insult to somebody. Yeah. And then they're shocked when straight white men stop voting Democrats.
I love how again the cope, right? I'm going to read this again. One of the key developments in Midwestern politics in recent years has been the shift of some white working class and male voters from Democrats to Republicans, including those who voted for President Barack Obama in 2008 and 2012, but who were won over by Trump's cultural conservatism and populist nationalist economic values in 2016. If just once any one of these like political analysts would just briefly step out of their little freaking cocoon and actually ask the people that they treat as if there's some sort of weird species on a different planet some questions, they might get some insight into what's actually going on. Because they love to throw out these terms. It's like everything that's going on in the UK right now. It can all be explained by racist, extreme, radical, right-wing populism. It's never about, well, maybe, an entire demographic that voted for us less than 10 years ago is not voting for us now. Should we ask some probing questions on why that might be? Nah, just call them racist harder and see what happens. I'm going to go one other thing here, and this is the one that I really loved. This is a headline. Happy Warriors Harris and Walz propose an antidote to Trump's American carnage. Right?
What?
Exactly. Oh, gosh, why are these white male voters that we want to appeal to leaving us? And well, maybe it's because you describe any appeal to them as American carnage. This is so if you want to know why, at least some of the justification for picking Walz is, I don't think it was to shore up Minnesota, but it will definitely help, right? In that, it's because they think this is the guy to appeal to white middle class working men.
When she was asked why she picked him, she said, "Well, the reasons are personal."
What does that even mean?
What does that mean?
Like, are you dating? Like, I'm just saying, it could be.
It is. I mean, we are being subjected to an epic amount of gaslighting at the moment, where they're trying to. Basically, what they're trying to say is that, oh, if we stick a camo hat on this guy and talk about how he hunts and throws his football with his son, then again these voters that we have been decrying as the root of all evil in society are suddenly going to start voting for us again. How stupid do you think the average person in these states are?
Well,
seriously, think about that for a second. Like, this is the most astroturfed attempt to gin up popular support I think I've ever seen in a presidential campaign ever. And I lived through the 2020 election cycle with Joe Biden as the Democratic nominee.
But they do think that they're stupid, and there's a reason they think they're stupid. Is because these types of things have worked on people before. They are that stupid.
I do not think that.
It has worked before.
Okay, stop. I don't think every single voter.
I don't think every single voter.
No, but when you say they are that stupid,
the
that's
ones they're trying
impression.
to appeal to are that stupid.
They're trying to appeal to our base, our new base that they have not yet accepted our new base. Our new base are these white working class voters in Michigan and Pennsylvania and Ohio.
They're not trying to appeal to all of our base. They're trying to appeal to the gullible parts of our base.
Okay, wait. I don't agree with that. I think what is going on here is I think that there has been a major. It used to be, I am old enough to remember when the Democratic Party did a very, very good job of advertising themselves as the party of the blue collar working, man, right? That was their shtick. And I don't agree that their economic policies were actually good for the blue collar working man, but they at least had some appeal. They talked a lot about unions and fair wages and stuff like that, and benefits programs for people that were working. That has not been their shtick for over a decade now. And so there was a lot of people that grew up in environments where their parents were Democrats. They worked at the factory. They were members of the union. There was a culture behind it, not just a political party. And it was just seen as, well, yeah, that my local government is my dad's friend from the local union, and now I work in that union, and it's my buddy or whatever. And there was a camaraderie there, but you did have working class people that their primary concern was, how do I put food on the table? These guys seem to be helping with the people that tell me this is the way forward. There wasn't all the social stuff going on in schools and libraries. And then there was this wake up moment where it was like, wait a second, you guys aren't helping us with anything. I'm losing my job, and you're doing all this crazy crap. Like, this wasn't the Democratic Party 20 years ago. That person has come over. I don't think they're gullible. I just think they weren't that focused on politics. They had voted in accordance with kind of how their family had always voted, or how they had kind of thought about it, maybe at a local level. And then one day it was, here's this dude from New York that just seems to be telling it like it is. And you know what? He's mad about a lot of the things I'm mad about. And he doesn't sound like any of the politicians I've gone. And so I'm going to pick that guy.
I don't think the Democrats are. Here's where the disconnect is, you guys. I don't think they're going after our base. Our base knows what they believe. They're going after the people right in the middle that swing one way or the other, and they're your average working person who doesn't have time to look at politics or research on their own. So they do whatever the mailer tells them to do, or they do whatever the commercial tells them to do, because they look at the person and they just seem nice. These people are stupid. They do go one side to the other just based on their feelings. And those are the people they're courting. And it works every time for
You
the
mean
Democrats.
the voters who vote based off of vibes?
Yes,
rather than...
those are the people that they are the ones who decide every single one of these elections. It's not our base and it's not their base. It's who panders to these people in the middle that have no idea what they believe.
Let's go over a couple of things that because Walz did, like most people. It was funny. We were doing the thumbnail for this show, and we had a picture of Walz on there. I'm like, we're going to have to put something up there about VP because most people are going to have no idea who this dude is, right? He's never featured prominently in anything on a national level, right? So we're going to talk about 5 things, and this is stuff. This is Yahoo News put this out, right? These are 5 things that they hold up as being reasons why Walz kind of like burst into the national scene. All right, the first one is, here's a quote, right? These are weird people. This isn't the thing, by the way. These are weird people. In an appearance on MSNBC, Walz called the men on the Republican White House ticket weird people, coining a phrase that has since caught on among many Democrats. Walz has repeated the line since it caught on, saying in another public appearance, these guys are just weird. Look, are they a threat to democracy? Yes. Are they going to take away our rights? Yes. Are they going to put people's lives in danger? Yes. This is a pro-Walz article largely explaining why this guy is jumping into national prominence. So that's one, right? The whole people are weird thing. Here's another one.
Can I point one thing out about this people are weird thing? Of course it comes from a public school teacher. Like, I feel like these freaking kids are learning bullying tactics from their teachers half the time. All of the things that get like thrown at us for being homeschoolers, these buzzwords about socialization and all of this stuff, it always comes from the buzzwords that the teachers are feeding the kids. I'm not saying all teachers, you guys. Obviously, there's good ones. But this guy was not one of the good ones. He's doing the name-calling thing and the bullying shtick just like the rest do.
I think it's hilarious that the side that wants to take children away from their parents to mutilate them in the name of transgender ideology wants to lecture anybody anywhere in the world on weirdness.
Yeah, no, we're going to get into that because we're going to talk about what his actual record in Minnesota is. Because right now we're talking a lot about what he says and how he projects himself. Here's another one: Turkey's special, right? So in a video post on his own Twitter profile or X profile in 2023, Walz shared footage of him and his daughter Hope at the Minnesota State Fair. In the video, the governor suggests that they get corn dogs after they ride the slingshot. I'm vegetarian, Hope says. Turkey, then, Walz responds. When Hope reminds him that turkey's meat, Walz shoots back, not in Minnesota. Turkey's special. The clip caught on as soon as it resurfaced in July, partly because of the banter he and Hope exchange, in which he expresses the stereotypical Midwest attitude toward vegetarianism, and partly for his laughter when the video shows him getting catapulted in the air on the roller coaster. So again, this is part of like the very, very staged attempt to demonstrate, see, look, I'm one of you. I think some of this stuff is kind of crazy too. Here's another one. Social Security was the boots. Speaking to MSNBC's Jen Psaki about Trump's vice presidential pick, J.D. Vance, Walz said that Republicans like Vance screamed socialism when they warned about the liberal agenda, before asserting the Democrats just build roads and we build schools and we build prosperity into this. It is amazing to me that when you look at everything, we're going to talk about exactly what Democrats did in his state under his governorship. And guess what? Turns out it wasn't just building roads and schools. No, it turns out they had some other things that they wanted to spend your tax dollars on. But whenever socialism comes up, whenever government spending comes up, they've always got this narrative. They're like, well, what about the roads? Oh, is that all you're spending money on? So none of this other stuff, right? Just roads. Oh my gosh. Here's the what a monster quote. What a monster quote. In another viral clip, CNN host Jack Tapper told Walz that Republicans will try to attack his effort he's selected as Harris's running mate. Tapper, listen to this. Listen to the way Tapper phrases this. Tapper then asked Walz how he would respond if Republicans criticized him for legalizing recreational marijuana, expanding LGBTQ plus protections, and offering free breakfast and lunch for school children. What a monster, Walz jokingly responded. Kids are eating and having full bellies so they can go learn, and women are making their own healthcare decisions, and we're a top 5 business state. We also rank in the top 3 of happiness. Brushing aside the idea that he should be concerned about his record, Walz added, so yeah, my kids are going to eat here, and you're going to have a chance to go to college, and you're going to have an opportunity to live where we're working on reducing carbon emissions. Oh, and by the way, you're going to have personal incomes that are higher, and you're going to have health insurance. If that's what they want to label me, I'm more than happy to take the label, he concluded. I wanted to illustrate this too because of Tapper, right? Because Tapper is often touted as someone that's more of an objective journalist. I want you to think about the hard-hitting question he asked here. What are you going to do when Republicans criticize you for recreational marijuana, expanding LGBTQ plus protections, and offering free breakfast and lunch program?
What a softball question.
Tapper, you're an ass. You're an absolute ass. You could have asked questions like, hey, when you sat there and let Minneapolis burn to the ground, how are you going to address that? Or, hey, when you decided to use state funds in order to put tampon machines in the boys' bathroom in schools, how are you going to defend that? No. It's never let's get into the meat of the policies that actually took place. It's let's just repeat Democrat talking points about intentions and kindness and tolerance and inclusion, and then be like, what do you think those mean Republicans are going to say about you? So Tapper, yeah. And then finally, the last one. I bought an air filter for my furnace. A number of moments have helped cement Walz's reputation as a typical Midwestern dad, a guy intent on just fixing things up, often quite literally, with some photos showing him looking inside the hood of a car. In one service interview, Walz was asked about the last thing he got to do as a normal citizen, truly out in public and truly by yourself. After pausing, he offered his answer. I went to Menard's, a Midwestern hardware store chain, and bought an air filter for my furnace. So there you go.
He's just a typical Midwestern dad who wants to take your child away from you and chop their genitals off.
That wants to set up a sanctuary state so that your child can run away from home and then go to Minnesota in order to get chemical castration medicine and surgeries. Life-altering surgeries to cut off perfectly healthy genitalia. That's just your typical salt of the earth, Midwestern guy.
Regular guy.
Yeah, this is
again. It's a, as I said earlier, it's a mass astroturfing is what's taking place. We are being subjected to an epic amount of gaslighting right now, and the sad part is, going back to Tina's point. By the way, Tina, it's worth pointing out in our live chat, we were flooded with comments saying that you were right about that spiel about low information voters or undecided voters. The sad part about all of this is that it might work. There is a not insignificant chance that Walz could end up becoming the next vice president. And when you actually look at the record of this man, rather than just the rhetoric behind him and the astroturfing behind him, that's actually quite a scary proposition. You brought up earlier that, the vice president doesn't really do a whole lot. The vice president, in the capacity of being vice president, doesn't necessarily do a whole lot. But vice presidents typically end up running for president, right? Like Al Gore ran for president. Joe Biden ran for president and won. Mike Pence ran for president, did not win. But the point is that there's been plenty of vice presidents in the past that have gone on to become president in their own right. And somebody like Walz is, in many respects, emblematic of the current state of the Democratic Party. This fake attempt to, astroturf and gaslight people into thinking, oh, I'm just folksy. I'm your typical Midwest dad. Yeah, no, you're not, because the typical Midwest dad is not trying to give driver's licenses to illegal immigrants. They're not cheering on and supporting looting and rioting within cities. They're not trying to take children away from them and chemically castrate them. They're not advocating for open borders and mass illegal immigration, and even saying that they would encourage illegal immigration into the country.
Let's actually get in. So we've talked about, again, how he projects himself. We've talked about the things that the left have held up as these are perfect examples of why this guy has gone on to the national stage. Now let's actually, because one of the things he brags about is he doesn't use a teleprompter, which means occasionally he's very honest about what he believes. So what we're going to do next is we got some clips here where you're going to hear him in his own words. Right, so we got this first one here. The socialism neighborliness one? Yeah, this one right here. This also comes from our friend Christy Clark. If you're not following Christy Clark, go over and follow her on Instagram. She's great.
I just realized I had us muted earlier.
All right,
Hang
go
on 1 second. Let me reload it.
You're going to have to unmute it again. All right, there you go.
That socialism is just being nice to your neighbor.
Don't ever shy away from our progressive values. One person's socialism is another person's neighborliness.
Socialism is not about independent acts of kindness. It's a government philosophy that has never worked anywhere, ever. In America, it's not
pause. This is another one of the things that drives me nuts about this is it's this idea of like, oh, no. When you think socialism, you're thinking like Karl Marx. I'm not a communist. No, I just believe in neighborliness. Like, oh yeah, no, Stalin was super neighborly. Like he was all about going over and borrowing a cup of sugar. And if you didn't give it to him, killing you and sending your family off to a gulag. This idea that socialism is just neighborliness. Here's my question. If it's just neighborliness, why do you need a bunch of government control in order to implement it? Why can't you just rely on people being neighborly? I've never once used the power of government to compel my neighbor to give me their stuff.
Neighborliness. This is really interesting because, this is coming from a guy that thinks it's completely fine to lop off body parts, healthy body parts off of teenagers, right? In the name of mental illness. Totally fine with that. Neighborliness, and you're looking at socialism, which is responsible for a lot of death throughout history. And so it's not really that big of a stretch to be neighborly and offer death to your neighbors, right? If they don't agree with you.
Yeah, that's totally neighborly. That's what I will commonly do. That I will go over to my neighbor and ask to borrow something, and if they say no, I burn their house to the ground and confiscate their property.
Right.
In the name of the people.
Don't forget that your wife leaves the windows open so she can smell the burning tires.
You are jumping ahead.
Tina is spoiling the audience right now. Nick, remember back when we did our debate episode, the classical liberalism versus neo-reactionaryism, and I was asked in that debate to give a definition of my position, the argument that I was making, which was more of like the post-liberal argument, and I basically said that liberalism does not work, and then I elaborated and I said that more broadly, it functions as a universal solvent that dissolves the social and political bonds that enable a civilization to function.
That was a really good way to put it. Universal solvent.
Think about that for a second. I'm going somewhere with this, with the whole neighborliness. Socialism in some ways is a attempt to artificially create camaraderie, artificially create neighborliness. It is an attempt to reinforce those social bonds brought about by the same people that are actually dissolving social bonds. Notice how it's not people on the right that promote socialism, it's people on the left that promote socialism. It is liberals that promote socialism. And the reason why is because ultimately liberalism dissolves the organic bonds that hold a society together. And in order to try to plaster over that dissolving effect, that universal solvent, they substitute organic neighborliness, organic social bonds with coercion, with forced social bonds. Yeah. It never works in the end, though. No. You cannot establish, the French Revolutionary phrase, right? Liberty, fraternity, equality. You cannot establish fraternity through state-sanctioned violence at the end of the day. Fraternity is something that springs up organically within a culture, within a society of people that voluntarily come together. But when you promote a philosophy and a set of ideas that results in the dissolving of those social bonds, because nobody's against neighborliness. No. We on the right openly promote this. In fact, I would argue that we're the only ones that truly organically promote this when we support things like church and community and again, and culture and history and language. Liberals believe in a universalizing ideology that transcends all of these things and actually ultimately argues that all of them are irrelevant. Everything, it's the new liberal man. It's not even just the new socialist man anymore. And when they promote this ideology that results in these things going by the wayside, that enable a culture to form, enable a society to form, their response to it is not, oh, we've gone too far. No, their response is we now need to reimpose these things by force. But again, it never works. There's never been a country in history that's pulled it off.
The argument that I've used before is that I've had people tell me, and it kind of goes into his whole like, oh, free lunch is this. There's no such thing. Right. And I've even pointed this out to somebody because we had a program where they were trying to actually increase the school lunch program where kids were taking food home with them and getting it on the weekends. And I said, I don't know that the school is the appropriate mechanism for this. So like, how could you say that? How could you do that? Why do you want kids to be hungry? I said, can I ask you a question? We have multiple welfare programs already established in order to feed children. To feed people and feed children, to feed families. And now you're trying to create another one. Here's my question. If you're already signed up for these programs and you're already getting the benefit of them and your child is still repeatedly coming to school hungry, we should probably take a look at the potential child abuse which is taking place. Don't you think? Instead of just covering it up and adding one more government program on top of another government program, at what point do we get to ask, why aren't your previous ones working? Could it have something to do with the fact that what you are actually doing is convincing some parents that they have no actual responsibility for the welfare and feeding of their own child? Because you've told them that this is a government function. So fine, they're looking at like, okay, government, where are you going to show up at? Do you think that actually builds better bonds with respect to family and the raising of children? Or do you think it tears them down by replacing the parents with the state?
And let's not forget that if you qualify for free lunch program, you also qualify for a lot of other food stamp related, WIC related, even welfare related. So you're already getting all of this stuff that's meant to feed your child.
Yeah.
And now the school wants to redouble the efforts.
But this is what I come down to, and this goes to Christian's point as well. It's this idea of they want to replace ultimately family, neighborliness, community, church, with the state. Why? Because all of those other things essentially compete with the state, right? I've said this before, like people will assume, like, well, Nick, you just don't understand what it is to struggle. Oh, really? We know exactly what it is like to struggle. When we first got married, we were making nothing. I always share the story. I remember a time where we were actually trying to help out another couple, and we didn't have enough money to pay the bills. Like we had our power turned off in the winter, and I felt horrible. I felt like a failure. And we had some family that said, "Hey, look, well, we can help you guys out while you guys kind of recover." And I felt horrible at the time. I felt embarrassed as a man, right? I felt embarrassed about I was serving. It's not like I wasn't working, right? I was serving in the 82nd Airborne Division, right? Tina was working as well at I think Old Navy or Clinique or something like that at the time. The point is that when family stepped in to help, I didn't feel entitled to that. I felt gratitude. I felt the need to take the help that we needed to fix the problem as quickly as possible, and then to try to make other arrangements to make sure it didn't happen again. Right? That's what I felt. But I also felt a sense of gratitude and community with friends and family that helped us. I did not feel a sense of entitlement, like, well, where's the government? Why aren't they taking money away from somebody else and giving it to me? But when you replace family and community with a state program, you don't create gratitude. You don't create a need to reciprocate. You create a sense of entitlement and a very loyal voting demographic that now sees you as essential to their children being fed, their power being on, their rent getting paid. And that's the part when I look at this, I'm like, you're not being a neighbor. You're not being a neighbor. You're setting up a nanny state so that people are increasingly dependent upon you.
He actually, speaking of nanny state, he implemented a hotline where you could inform on your neighbors. So this is a form of neighborliness, I guess.
Yeah.
So during COVID, you could inform on your neighbors and let them know that let the government know that your neighbor is having too many people at their house. And he's even on video quoted as saying something to the effect of, the last thing we want are all these people gathered together in a church. He literally isolated church as a place that he doesn't want people gathering, and we want to open up this hotline so you can call it in. And so this is neighborliness to him. It follows that socialist thing so perfectly, this whole informing on your neighbors, wishing death on your neighbors who don't agree with you.
Yeah, nothing screams community more than reporting your neighbor to your local Stasi agent.
Yes.
I think that's actually probably how the ad went. It's like, we understand that there are some people not being neighborly, so we have set up this special hotline where you can call the authorities, and we will show up at your neighbor's door in order to make sure that they are more neighborly in the future. That's Midwestern dad. Midwestern dad.
It goes back to what
Yeah.
I was saying, that like the left have dissolved all of the traditional bonds that enable a community to form. And some of them realize that this is a problem, and their solution is not, oh, we need to stop applying the dissolving agent, the universal solvent. No, their solution is we will force conformity, we will force uniformity, we will force unity, and we will force community. You can't do it.
Yeah.
Community springs up through traditional institutions, and when you tear those down, you can't construct new ones through acts of law and legislative fiat, basically.
Well, look, maybe we're taking all of this out of context, and he actually is more of a moderate. Maybe that's why, because again, his whole appeal is to those kind of Midwestern voters that have left the Democratic Party because it's become too extreme and they've gone. So let's see. Maybe he is a moderate. Do we have a clip where he was? Oh, we do. We'd have a clip right here. All right. So here we go. Is Tim Walz a centrist? Let's see what happens here.
Walz, are you a progressive or are you a centrist?
I'm a progressive.
Oh, okay, cool. Thanks for explaining that. Because again, now keep in mind, he could have done the political thing here, right? I actually respect the fact that he was honest here. He could have done the political thing and said, well, I don't see it as being a binary choice, right? They're all about non-binary, right? I don't see it as an either or proposition. I think I can be both a centrist and I think I can also have progressive values. He could have done all that. It's like, nope, I'm a progressive.
He's proud of his label.
Yeah,
He's proud of it.
He is. All right, let's see this next one. Oh, I do enjoy this one because this goes kind of right back to the idea of, remember when we talked about the viral moments that he had that like pushed him into prominence, and one of the things that he claimed was, these people are weird, they're violent, they're a threat to democracy, they're going to take away our rights. He's very concerned about your civil liberties. He's concerned about your rights. He sees it as his obligation to protect them. Let's go ahead and look at what he says in this next clip here.
I think we need to push back on this. There's no guarantee to free speech on misinformation or hate speech, and especially around our democracy.
Oh, exactly. This is also a very good point. If you should see anybody engaging in what we might consider misinformation, and of course the state will decide what the misinformation is.
And it better not be against the state.
Of course, because that would be a threat to democracy. You can call this hotline because we need to push back. We need to push back on all these attempts for people going out there willy-nilly talking about things that the state has not approved. That is neighborliness. It is incredibly, they're going to take our rights away. By the way, whenever a left-wing politician, whenever a self-described progressive and a guy that thinks socialism is just neighborliness tells you that they're going to take your rights away, what right do you think they mean? Every single time. Abortion. That's the only right that they care about. Your ability to kill your offspring at pretty much any point, right? And he actually bragged about how Nancy Pelosi told him that he might want to tone it down a little bit on how pro-choice he was, because they enshrined into law in Minnesota that you can have an abortion all the way up to the point of birth, right? All the way. Now, the left will admit, well, nobody does that. Oh, good. Well, then you don't mind actually lowering it, right? You don't mind lowering it, except for maybe like medical necessity, like life of the mother. You don't mind lowering it, right? Well, no, it needs to be there. Why then? Why? If it never happens, why are you actually concerned about that? It's because it does happen. Mm-hmm. It's because there is such a thing as late-term abortion. But again...
And it's ridiculous, too, because there is no need for late-term abortion. There is early delivery.
Yeah.
Early delivery, emergency delivery of a baby may be medically necessary, and medically it's much safer for the woman for them to do an emergency C-section than it is to have to go through the process of killing a baby first.
Well, I think it's fascinating to me that they love to talk about, they're going to take away your rights. And there's usually two rights they're talking about. Again, abortion, that's the only right that the left really seems to care about, because then they end up trying to make up rights to things that you can't possibly have rights to. And then the other thing that they're always going to, your voting rights. They're going to take away your voting rights. And what does that mean? Well, we don't think that people in the country illegally should vote. We don't think people should engage in fraudulent voting. But at no point, no shape. In fact, if you want to know about a political party that actually launched a very, very concerted effort legally and socially in order to prevent people from voting in this country, look no farther than the Democratic Party. They're the party of actually taking away people's voting rights. It's not Republicans. We've always been the party of actually expanding voting rights to legal citizens, whether it was women or other minorities. It's the Democrats that have regularly set up poll taxes was not a Republican thing. That was a Democrat thing. Poll testing was not a Republican thing. That was a Democrat thing. Right. But when it comes to this, whenever they say your rights, they always mean voting rights. And what they really mean is your right to vote 45 days early and to fill out an absentee in somebody else's name. Right. And the only other right that they seem to care about is a woman's right to be able to abort her child all the way up till month. I'm sorry. A birthing person's right to abort their child all the way up to month 9. That's the only rights they seem to care about. But look, maybe we should just calm down, because after all, guy's a war hero. Guy's a war hero. Let's go ahead and do this. Let's go ahead and see this next clip here, right? I think it was, this one.
Yeah, this is it.
Yeah.
Oh, I made the same mistake again.
All right, go ahead.
All right.
Hope woke up like many of you did 5 weeks ago and Dad said, Dad, you're the only person I know who's in elected office. You need to stop what's happening with this. I'll take my kick in the butt for the NRA. I spent 25 years in the Army and I hunt. And I gave the money back, and I'll tell you what I have been doing. I've been voting for common sense legislation that protects the Second Amendment, but we can do background checks. We can do CDC research. We can make sure we don't have reciprocal carry among states, and we can make sure that those weapons of war that I carried in war is the only place where those weapons are at.
You see what I mean, guys?
He carried weapons in war, honey.
He
weapons of war in war.
He carried weapons of war in war. So I did some research. Mm-hmm. I did some research on where, because Army for 25 years, Command Sergeant Major, Field Artillery Unit. That's combat arms. And so I took a look at where he went to war, and it was Italy, which would have been really impressive if he had fought in like World War II. But it turns out it was the 2000s, and I don't know if you guys know this, but there wasn't a whole lot of combat going on where he was stationed. Like, I went to Iraq a couple of times. We had a little bit of combat over there. I remember carrying weapons and doing combat operations in, like, north of Baghdad, around Beiji area, stuff like that. But never in Italy. Like, that's
how hot was the Italian front?
I gotta tell you,
2000.
out of all, I didn't realize that was an option. Like, I thought like, okay, if you're going to war, Iraq, Afghanistan, there's some other dangerous stuff going on in the Philippines and whatnot.
Has there been a 13th Battle of the Isonzo that I haven't heard about recently?
I had no idea.
But no. Technically, he was fighting the war in Iraq from Italy.
Oh man, that's a good gig if you can get it. I'll tell you what. I was a moron. I fought the war in Iraq where, like, the danger was taking place. I didn't realize you could fight the war in Iraq from Italy. That's good work if you can get it. I'll tell you what. No, homeboy here decided that he was going to, I guess he had submitted his paperwork for retirement before his unit actually ended up deploying. Look, I'm going to say this is an important distinction here. I want to make sure that everyone knows here, because there is a difference between stolen valor and douchebaggery. Now, the important clarification here is all stolen valor is douchebaggery, but not all douchebaggery is stolen valor. So, for instance, we have a picture up here on Tim Walz wearing a Special Forces hat at a New Jersey Springsteen concert. And that's actually 1st Special Forces Group. That was
Nick's unit.
That was my unit. That was the unit I went to actual Iraq in, not Italy, but actual Iraq in was with 1st Special Forces Group. That's how I did my tours. Now, that is not technically stolen valor. That is best described as kind of a mild form of douchebaggery. Apparently, somebody presented him with this hat, and he decided to go around wearing it. Now, again, you can forgive him.
It's like wearing your favorite team's hat.
Maybe he was wearing his favorite team's hat. Maybe he was wearing his favorite team's hat. But for a guy that goes around and says, the weapons I carried in war, that is stolen valor. So when you claim to have done something you didn't do, that's stolen valor. When you just wear a first group hat, that might be a little douchey, but that's not stolen valor. So I want everyone to understand the difference. One is stolen valor, one is not. Both are douchey. Okay? But here's the other thing that is incredibly frustrating about this. And we have some members in the Virginia House of Delegates that do the same thing. Again, I led special ops teams, and that's why we got to take your guns. Some of us went to war and saw what happened when you disarm civilians and leave them at the complete mercy of tyranny, a dictator, terrorism, and criminality. And we thought, my gosh, that's horrible. That's horrible. We could never let that happen to our own citizens. People always have to have the means to be able to protect themselves. And then some people go overseas, whether it be to war or to Italy, and they come back and they say, gosh, I love this idea of civilians not being able to defend themselves as long as I'm in charge. And what I think is far worse out of this is not just him claiming that, oh, I went to war and that's why I can justify taking away your essential civil liberties. What I don't like is the idea of you are actually trying to, you swore an oath to the Constitution. And now you're trying to use your military service as a way to justify taking away something from a citizen. And that's pretty horrible in my opinion.
Right. We have a constitutional right to weapons of war. Let me just say, I am so sick and tired of politicians being like, I hunt. I'm sorry. We weren't duck hunting when we got the Second Amendment put into place. No, they had just gotten finished having to try to, fight for their own freedom against a tyrannical government.
Yeah, turns out the founders were not terrified of the deer imposing tyranny on an otherwise free people.
So we have the right to bear arms, and they need to be the type you could use in a war against your own government if necessary. And I know that sounds really crazy and right wing, but that's just the facts.
I love that the same people that try to behave as if like, well, there's two arguments that they use in response to the idea that Americans should be able to have, semi-automatic rifles, right? Or small arms or whatever it is, weapons of war. First of all, they try to act like, well, we live in this post-Enlightenment society. Like, why would anybody need this sort of thing in order to protect themselves from tyranny? Okay, you do realize that most of the genocidal, oppressive dictatorships all took place post-Enlightenment, right? Like,
I was going to say it's because we live in a post-Enlightenment society.
The 20th century was just replete with governments that came in, disarmed people, and then proceeded to oppress, imprison, and murder them. That's why. Second of all, this argument that, why do you need from oppression? Or it's the idea that how do you honestly believe that you'd be able to take on a modern military? Like, you really think you could do that? I'm like, well, I don't know. Let's call the Taliban and ask them what they think. Because last time I checked, the Taliban didn't have nuclear weapons or F-15s or M1 Abrams tanks, except for the military equipment we left them. Right, the most advanced military equipment that the Taliban has was left to them by Joe Biden. Right, but this idea that, well, you'd never be able to stand up to a modern military. No, you can, especially when it's hundreds of millions of armed American citizens. And
all they're really doing is making your argument for why you need tanks, and why I need an F-16 in my driveway.
And the thing is like, look. I don't know how many times I got to say this. I never want there to be a situation where Americans have to actually resort to violence in order to throw off an oppressive government. I want us to be able to use peaceful transitions of power and everything else. But for anybody to claim that the last 100 years of human history or 200 years of human history haven't given us plenty of reasons on why, yes, free law-abiding citizens need to have access to firearms in order to defend themselves from criminals, from terrorists, and yes, from tyrannical governments, is someone that has apparently never picked up a history book or picked it up and thought, well, it would be fine if I was the tyrant. So anyways, let's go back to, we got a couple more things here from Walz. Let's look at his actual record as governor. So we've discussed some of the things he's said, right? He's very worried about your rights, except for your gun rights, which he wants to severely curtail, and accept your parental rights, and accept your right to say what you want as long as he determines it's misinformation or, quote, a threat to democracy. So if you liked any of those like essential rights covered by things like the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, the Ninth Amendment, he's not really concerned about those ones. But what has he actually done as governor? Maybe this is the part where we're going to learn that, just like Josh Shapiro, he's tried to find some areas of compromise with those voting demographics that the Democrats are now suddenly concerned about.
He actually did try to find areas of compromise.
Oh, good. What was it?
With the rioters.
Oh, that's what it was. Okay. Which rioters?
The George Floyd protests, the Summer of Love in 2020, when the largest city in his state was being set on fire on a daily basis, and he decided to take the side of the rioters. And in fact, he actually called the National Guard in his state. He basically dismissed them as a bunch of like 19-year-old, hoodlums or something like that. Which is now that's not a direct quote. Just understand that's not a direct quote. But he basically was hesitating to deploy the National Guard because he thought that they were thugs.
Well, he was afraid what the National Guard would do if they were coming to bring in law and order or something like that.
Yeah. So
because he wasn't there as their command sergeant major anymore, right?
Yeah, he.
So we got one look at right here. So part 1, crimes include murder, aggravated assault, robbery, rape, burglary, motor vehicle theft, larceny, and arson. So the U.S. rate was.
Here's the quote, by the way.
Oh, here we go.
19-year-old Cooks is.
Oh, there we go. As the Twin Cities burned for 3 days in May 2020, Walz froze, terrified of upsetting his party's activist base, which sympathized with the rioters, for whom Kamala Harris raised money. Walz hesitated to commit the National Guard, whom he dismissed as 19-year-old Cooks.
Yeah, but when they finally, National Guard 19-year-old
Yeah, this is the same National Guard he served in, right? Yeah. But when they finally were deployed, the violence ceased immediately. Oh, wow. Look at that. Wow. So not only did he abandon his unit before they had to actually go off to war, where he played a role as the senior non-commissioned officer for the unit, but then when he was governor, he decides to insult them as well, as his city burns and he watches. And his wife is actually, she did an interview. I don't know if we have the clip here, but you can look it up. Like, we're not making this up. And she talked about as Minneapolis was burning, and she left the windows open for as long as she could to smell the flames from the tires and whatnot. And I tweeted out to Tim Walz on this one. I said, wow, that's kind of an interesting comment. Would you describe it as weird?
Yeah. They both talked about it being, there was like a sense of hope in what was going on.
Well, it wasn't their house being burned down. They have state sponsored, they have state financed protection. So Minnesota crime rates actually have been going up since 2018 fairly consistently, as the overall U.S. rate has been decreasing. Apparently, this is one of the major accomplishments of Tim Walz. Again, just a regular Midwestern dad who allows major cities to burn as he insults the National Guard that he abandoned and, allows crime to skyrocket.
I mean, this chart, to explain this for our audio listeners, this chart really does a good job of illustrating the principle that the worse off a person or group acts, the more lavish praise the left heaps upon them. This chart is showing the crime rate. It's part 1 crimes, which include murder, aggravated assault, robbery, rape, burglary, motor vehicle theft, larceny, and arson. And this goes from 2010 all the way to 2022. It shows the U.S. average rate versus the Minnesota rate. And what you see from 2010 until about 2020 is that the average rate in the U.S. had been steadily dropping. It had been dropping since the 80s. The same thing had been taking place in Minnesota, but Minnesota started to reverse in 2018. Take a guess who was elected governor of Minnesota in 2018.
I'm going to guess it was J.D. Vance.
Yes, no.
It was Walz. It was Walz. Oh, my gosh. All right, my bad.
Yeah, so what you see since 2018 is that Minnesota has every year, with the exception of 2021, the crime rate with part 1 crimes was actually higher than the previous year. So every year that he has been governor, with the exception of 2021, it has been higher than the previous year. And the only reason why is because 2021 had big shoes to fill.
Yeah, right. Well, and here's the crazy part too. Again, it started happening in 2018. So it's not as if this was all, and again, the police force, some of the major police forces in Minnesota have never recovered from the officers that essentially left and said, what is the point of being a police officer here? Right? If none of your elected officials are actually going to have your back when it comes to having to go out and do difficult things in the midst of a riot, right? Like, what are you going to do? And again, this started before the 2020 Summer of Love and all that. Like, this was a part of his policies before there was all the major, rioting and whatnot.
It's also worth noting, according to this article, that that Minnesota's crime rates began climbing in 2018, like we said, when Walz took office, and 2 years before George Floyd's death and the riots in the summer of 2020. It goes on to say that in 2024, this year, the crime rate in Minneapolis is 29% above where it was in 2019.
Wow. Well, that is quite the...
4 years after the Summer of Love and the burning of the tires that his wife apparently loves to smell.
Yeah.
So, it's...
We should come up with a scented candle that says burning
tires. Minneapolis burning tires. Yeah. Honestly, Donald Trump needs to put that on his shop. I'm sure that certain people might buy it. But point is that at the end of the day, you get what you tolerate. This is a policy choice. This is not systemic. This is not societal problems. Christian, this is a lack of will.
Say whatever you want, Christian, but I know that you are probably just here cherry picking stats making fun of this poor man who's just, decided to embrace greater criminal justice reform. But on education, you can't deny that as our very own assistant football coach, governor of Minnesota, has just spent so much more money on education because he truly Oh, wait, you do have that chart.
Well, he actually has spent so much more. The problem
significantly
is that
more, but
the results are quite pathetic when you actually look at the numbers here. Nick, do you want to read it off?
Sure. So if you look at it here, Walz frequently touts his experience as an educator, but Minnesotans have seen no benefit from this, with the quality of Minnesota's K-12 schools failing steadily during his time in office. Minnesota's 4th grade reading and 8th grade math scores on national tests are the lowest in 30 years. 30 years. On the education component of CNBC's much heralded, including by Walz, Best States for Business, Walz will tell national audience he fully funded K-12 education, but more money does not translate into stronger achievement. I cannot emphasize this point enough. There is this myth among progressives that the only reason why test scores go down or test scores improve is entirely a focus of how much money you spend. And so they put very little attention on the actual core fundamentals which cause math and reading scores to go up. And instead, they just throw more money at it. They talk about teacher pay because it's a popular thing to talk about politically. And then they push as much social emotional learning as they possibly can. If you want to learn about the origins of social emotional learning, first of all, it's not just, we want to make sure that kids properly are able to communicate and understand, and those kids that have undergone trauma, we want to be able to, realize the way that they process information. That is not what it is. James Lindsay actually does a great job. Go to James Lindsay New Discourses and look up his talks on social emotional learning to figure out what they are cramming into your kids' courses. And a lot of them are opt-out courses, which means your kid is getting these courses, whether you like it or not, whether you want them to take it or not, right? And then you have to be aware of it and then opt out. And believe me, there's always consequences for opting out. They may be subtle at times. But what we're basically seeing here is that the money has gone up on per pupil spending. They're up at around like $16,000 per pupil, and yet the scores keep going down. Like some of their math proficiency has barely started to creep up, but this just kind of begs the question, how are you spending the money? But they don't want you to ask that question. It's just more money, more power. The solution is always more money, more power. That explains everything. All right, let's
we need to stress this too, because the amount of spending within the public school system in Minnesota has gone up by, I did the math actually while you were talking. It's gone up by about 20% since he's taken office. The proficiency level when it comes to math has dropped by over 20% since he's taken office. And the proficiency level when it comes to reading has declined literally every year that he has been governor of the state. So 20% increase in spending and plus 20% drop in actual results at the same time.
So here we go.
But that's something to brag about?
Instead of achievement, Walz focused on instituting radical social studies standards and ethnic studies requirements that infuse critical social justice ideology into K-12 education. He used a bait and switch to sell ethnic studies as learning about other cultures while hiding the real purpose to reshape our children's identity around skin color and convince them that America is a radicalized hierarchy defined by oppression and injustice. Walz also allowed protesters to tear down a statue of Christopher Columbus and changed Minnesota's state flag because he wrongly believed it was racist. Again, this is where the emphasis went. It was shut down the schools, right? And then when parents started learning what was actually going on in some of these classes, they got upset, and the response was to tell parents that they were racist, and they just didn't properly understand that we were all living in a racist, patriarchal, institutionally horrible, no good, very bad place. And so that's what they put the money at. You wanted your kid to be able to read and learn how to do math, maybe understand the scientific method, maybe, God forbid, learn a little bit about critical thinking, how to formulate an argument. No, what your kid got told, and especially if your kid was a minority, what your kid got told was the only reason you can't succeed is because of racism, and what you need is more progressive politicians like Tim Walz, and they'll make it better. Because they'll take from other people and give it to you. You want to know what's math isn't racist, Timmy. What's racist is telling minority children they can't succeed. That's racist. Because we have replete examples of minorities succeeding all over this country. It's just I've gotten so sick of this.
I think it's
drumbeat.
actually even worse than this, because at the same time that math and reading proficiency has plummeted under his watch, the response has not been, oh, let's actually teach students. No, the response has been, let's indoctrinate students and put tampons in boys' bathrooms.
Yeah.
That's what Minnesota really needs. Minnesota really needs to actually teach the next generation of students that they're evil because they're white, and by the way, tampon if you're a boy.
Yeah.
By the way, we did skip this section up here, which needs to be said, about his response to COVID. Because at the same time that he was allowing Minneapolis to be burned to the ground, he decided, oh, okay, you're allowed to go out onto the streets if you're going to be looting businesses and setting fires on people's properties and burning cars. But if you want to go to a church, or if you want to send your kid to the school system that I'm currently failing them at, no, actually, we're gonna make that illegal for that to happen, and we're also going to report on anybody that wants to protest against this type of stuff. So this article goes on to say, in response to the second challenge, COVID-19, in defiance of the science. So I'm surprised it didn't say in defiance of Fauci. Walz shut down schools.
It's because the terms are synonymous. They mean the same thing.
Walz shut down schools, churches, and businesses, and instituted draconian mask mandates and shelter-in-place orders. This was driven by a computer model cooked up by a couple of graduate students over a weekend, which was such a failure it was quietly abandoned. Walz spent $7 million on a morgue to hold all of the forecasted bodies. This, too, was quietly sold without ever housing a single body. Walz's failed nursing home policies resulted in over 5,000 deaths from COVID, one of the highest percentages in the country. And the man who likes to talk tough on cable news, telling Republicans to, quote, mind your own damn business, created a phone line for people to snitch on their neighbors who violated COVID regulations. For all of this government activity in response to COVID-19, Walz still managed to oversee the largest COVID fraud scheme in the country, with $250 million stolen. Millions more have been wasted in other fraudulent schemes from throughout his time in office, but no one has been fired or held accountable. Walz frequently touts his experience as an educator, but Minnesotans have seen no benefit. And then it goes on to talk about what we just discussed.
Look, just an average, hardworking assistant football coach, combat veteran, Midwestern dad who set up a rat line for people that were violating his COVID mandates, which didn't help anything and resulted in hundreds of millions of dollars being squandered. That's just your average guy.
But remember when he got that softball question from Jake Tapper, and he said, how are you going to push back from, giving students free lunches and Republicans pounce on you? And he said, Walz's defense is that, I support higher incomes. Really?
Yeah,
so here's the next point here. Read this off, Nick.
So in 2023, Walz squandered a $17.6 billion budget surplus and raised taxes on income, sales, gasoline, car tabs, deliveries, boats, marijuana, and businesses. His new family leave program will be funded with a new tax on every employee and employer in the state. They are yet to launch the program, but have already raised the tax rate. Under Walz's leadership, Minnesota recently fell behind the country in GDP per capita for the first time in modern history. So again, Jake Tapper, right, who again, alleged journalist, could have gone in and said, all right, we're going to look at the controversial stuff here. This is data. This is facts. We're not making this stuff up, right? This isn't our opinion on these things. This happened, right? Cost of living is going up in Minnesota in part because he decided to tax the living hell out of everything for a benefit that nobody is actually receiving. Tapper could have asked, look, you've raised a lot of taxes at a time when inflation is going up and people are having a hard time making ends meet. I mean, you talk about all this family leave stuff, but what about this? No. It's just, how are Republicans ever going to attack you for trying to give food to hungry children? Like, oh my gosh, what a punk. Again, that is, okay, once again, back to my example. Jake Tapper was not engaging in stolen valor. He was engaging in douchebaggery. So
wait,
again,
Jake Tapper?
Tapper, yeah, the reporter. All right, so GDP is going down. All right, but clearly that's it, right? Like it can't get any worse.
Nope, he's turning the state into California.
Oh gosh, okay, all right. How's he doing that?
Walz signed away Minnesota's energy future by locking us into a renewable. Apparently, the person who wrote this article lives in Minnesota. By locking us into a renewable energy mandate that is driving up electricity costs in the pursuit of unmeasurable climate change goals. Running an energy grid with weather-based intermittent energy sources, as called for in Walz's 2023 renewable energy mandate, is causing massive price increases and will ultimately lead to blackouts. And it shows, this chart right here shows the average retail price of electricity across all sectors, and it illustrates the United States, Minnesota, and California. And if you go back to 2018, you see that Minnesota's energy costs were a little bit higher than the United States, but they had been relatively stagnant for several years until Walz took office. And then lo and behold, since 2019, the energy costs in Minnesota have begun to skyrocket. They've started to mirror the pace of increase that you're seeing in California. But you know what? That's not all, because apparently you're not paying enough in taxes in the state as well.
Clearly not. Clearly not. How are we going to save the planet if you're not getting taxed on every single thing you can do in Minnesota? But look, despite all of this, people are still moving to Minnesota in droves. Oh, wait, no, they're not.
No, they're not. They're leaving.
Oh, they're leaving. Okay, all right. So they're leaving. So basically, this is what is happening in Minnesota, and this has happened in other places as well. When a hardcore, self-described, progressive, socialism is just neighborliness governor gets in there and prioritizes spending on things like tampons in the boys' bathrooms at your public school system, people leave the state. And then those same governors decide, well, gosh, I can't have this. The entire country must be subject to my neighborly policies, because right now they just end up leaving with their property and their children. And my gosh, I can't have that. And so now Kamala Harris has decided that in order to appeal to just, average run-of-the-mill working class folks that have voted for Trump a couple of times now, that they're going to bring in a guy that has harmed the economy of Minnesota, made energy costs go up, make pretty much every other cost go up, prioritized radical critical theory within your public school system while setting up rat lines to report on your neighbors if they were going to church during COVID, while at the same time he allowed cities to burn while insulting the very National Guard he claims to care so much about in the process. Like I said, average run-of-the-mill assistant football coach, Midwestern dad. This is the sort of thing that drives people. This is the sort of thing that drives people nuts.
He is the left's definition of a dad. And you think about dads for a second. Dads are extremely important to the family, right? And, most of the people on the left, they're all struggling with daddy issues right now. And, you know what happens when girls struggle with daddy issues? They pick bad men. And the left, they picked a bad dude. He fits what they think a father is, right? Because they don't have their own to know for sure what a father is like. So they just picked him. And now he's like the every dad, right? Yeah. But anybody who has a real dad who doesn't have the daddy issues can see right through it, I sure hope.
All right, let's look at some of our super chats here. I want to thank Joseph Groshik. He says, Wisconsin farmer and USMC veteran, and annoys me to no end when no one pays attention to us till election time. Then they pick Tim Walz, a so-called veteran, to win a swing state no one cares about till now. Yeah, Joe, I think there's a lot of veterans right now, and we've talked about this. We don't think, I don't personally think that the primary issue with Tim is that stupid comment he made at that meeting, although it makes me mad. But one of the things I've tried to explain to people that are looking at this going, look, of all the things he's done, why are we focusing on this? And part of it does come down to an integrity issue. It comes down that for those that served in the military and for those that went overseas and fought, the idea that somebody else would try to utilize that when they didn't in order to take away the very rights we went over to presumably fight for, that's insulting. And it's not just insulting; it shows a tremendous character issue. And so I agree. They got some problems here. Let's also look at we got another super chat here. I'm trying to get to all of these, by the way. So if I forgot one, I apologize. To put in context, all of these crimes are in the cities: St. Cloud, Rochester, or Duluth. All of us out here beyond the city and county limits, we're begging them to come out here and try it. Especially, it cut off here. This was the SOL. Sorry. Didn't you say that? Yeah, no, there was, I mean, again, you saw that whole, the left when they flipped out about that song, Try It in a Small Town.
Yeah.
And I remember when Antifa was tweeting out, like, we keep burning up cities, but we've got to go into the suburbs. We've got to go into the country. And like,
Please do.
So many of the people
come to the country.
So many of the people in the country are like, oh, we'd clear this up right away. Like this is, you're used to burning down your own cities. You don't come out to the country and burn down our areas. That doesn't happen. You want to peacefully protest, you can peacefully protest. Like right here in Culpeper, there was a BLM protest and it was peaceful. And everyone said, hey, go out, say your thing, because we respect freedom of speech. We respect your right to be able to disagree with us. But the moment disagreeing with us verbally or marching becomes, I'm going to throw a brick through the locally owned store whose owner I know, no, we're going to stop you. Right? The cops can help, but you're going to be stopped by the citizens. That crap doesn't fly here because unlike the astroturfed version of community that you have in these blue areas, we have actual community out here where we care about one another, look after one another, and don't have to ask permission to protect our property or the property of our friends. So yeah, that is why they will never take it, to the country. They'll talk a good game, but they will never actually do that. Or if they do, they won't do it very long. All right. Got another one here from Lance. Thank you very much. Tim came out of nowhere. Were Dems in denial of anti-Semitic ideas in their base? Planning Shapiro got a report and then went Tim. And would you agree that the Diet Bernie angle will dominate with Gen Z? So this is kind of part of our discussion too on how this is actually going to affect things. I don't know that there's a lot of voters. Tina makes the point that there are some people that vote based off of vibes. And there was a podcast we did a while back where somebody got upset because they thought we were just trashing independent voters. And it's like, look, I don't got a problem with people that don't want to affiliate with a political party. Like, I get it, right? The problem that I do have, and I think Tina has as well, but I'll let her speak for herself, is people that act like they don't pay attention to what any of the candidates say, what any of the parties are doing. They don't pay attention to any of the policy whatsoever. And then the last week, they decide, well, it's my civic duty to vote, and they show up and they vote for whoever has kind eyes. I wish that person wouldn't vote. You have some people that get out there and say, well, everyone needs to do their civic duty. No, your civic duty is to actually understand what you're voting for, not to go out there and just say, oh, well, I did it. I got my sticker. Like, know what you're actually doing. Because political manipulation, if you're the sort of person that votes based purely off of political manipulation through flyers the last week of the election cycle, I don't have a lot of respect for that. Mm-hmm. Nor do I think I should, because you are actually taking a right that you have, that people have fought for, right? And you're utilizing it to make a selection not based off of any sort of genuine understanding of what's going on, but just to make yourself feel better or vibes or to say you did your duty. Like, you did it. To that point, I don't know that there's a lot of people that are really conflicted right now based off of any of the issues that are pulling the lever because Walz is on the ticket with Kamala Harris now. I do think the press have realized, and we predicted this. Like I said, as soon as Joe Biden dropped out and it looked like Kamala was going to be the nominee, I said, I will tell you the entire Democrat strategy from here on out. It is going to be to spend the next 5 minutes trying to get you excited about Kamala Harris. When that fails, because no one's excited about her, to include Democrats. Democrats rejected her very early on in the Democrat presidential primary back in 2020. Nobody's excited about Kamala Harris. When that fails, because there's nothing to be excited about, they're going to revert back to calling you a racist, a sexist, a bigot, a threat to democracy. They're going to amp up the hatred, because if they can't get you to vote for someone, they will definitely get you to vote against somebody. If they honestly think that this dude with this kind of record, that they were just going to, well, oh, look, we picked an old white guy from the Midwest. You're happy now, right? It just goes to show that, once again, they're not actually listening, because they don't actually care. And this surface level manipulation, right? Back in the day, some politicians engaged in good manipulation, but they were the ones that actually listened, and they would lie more effectively to you. But this guy can't even lie effectively to you anymore, because they are so surrounded in their own little intellectual bubble, their own little ideological bubble, that the idea of actually appealing to you on any sort of level that would be meaningful comes off as the political hackery that it actually is. I think that's probably what's going to happen here. There will be exceptions. I'll put it. That's my opinion on that.
I think they'll
particular
use
question.
Walz to. He will be the one to come out and accuse everybody of being racists and bigots and things like that. They'll use their dad figure to say it with, high school coach authority.
Well, and not a single news reporter will actually ask him any tough questions. They'll get away with the same stuff that Tapper did. It's like, what do you say to Republicans that are angry at you because you expanded LGBTQ plus rights? Like, what you did was set up a sanctuary state to where if my child who is dealing with gender dysphoria runs away, you will protect them in your state from me, not because I engaged in any sort of abuse, but because I didn't want to give them chemical castration medicine or subject them to an ideology which I think is harmful for them, both their physical and emotional development. You will use the power of the state against me as a parent trying to protect my child. That's what you actually did. But nobody in the press is intellectually honest enough to actually differentiate between those two things. All right, Joseph, thank you again for another super chat. I don't want a civil war, but I ask one question. Why doesn't flyover states take care of their own and the East and West Coast try and survive without us, without trying to force laws on us? Joseph, Christian probably does the best example of this. And we've talked before on, look, if you want to live a certain way that I completely disagree with, providing you're not infringing on the rights and liberties of other people, I don't think the government should, be coming in and punishing you or anything else, right? Like, you can do you as long as you're not hurting other people in the process. But as Christian has pointed out before, that will never be good enough for them because the trans children of Mississippi must be liberated, right? Like, they will always quest more and more centralization of power because when we talked about it before, when that socialist mindset, when that neighborliness mindset attempts to replace the family, the church, and all these other community institutions with the state in order to take care of you, it cannot tolerate people who don't want to be dependent upon the state for two reasons. One, they can't allow for dissent. They can't. That's why they're increasingly describing anything that you say against them as hate speech or a threat to democracy, and then coming back and saying we've got to push back because there's no freedom of speech of things that we consider to be hate speech or a threat to democracy. The other thing is they need your labor. They need productive people to actually produce the tax revenue necessary to give away all the little socialist neighborly goodies that they want. So you leaving is something that they can't tolerate. And if they can't keep you in a state, well, then they'll do their best to keep you in a country. And that's never what the United States was supposed to be. We were supposed to have a core set of values that unified us as a country, but then we allowed individual states to be, as one Supreme Court justice put it, laboratories of democracy. The problem is that the blue laboratories are failing horribly. People are leaving and they can't afford to let it happen.
I think they're also on a rescue mission. One of the reasons why they won't leave you alone is because they think you're repressed and you just haven't been enlightened enough. And they are on a rescue mission to save you from yourself. It's the same reason why your kids go off to college and they come back at Thanksgiving dinner and you are now their mission field to try to convert you to their newfound ideology or religion, I guess you could call it. And so this is one of the reasons why they just will not leave you alone is because they think they need to rescue you from your own ideology because you're repressed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to what I was saying before about how the trans kids of Mississippi must be liberated. At the end of the day, the reason that we can't live and let live, and I said this near the end of the rant when we did our debate, is because they do not give our side the moral legitimacy to even exist. Mm-hmm. Liberalism is a universalizing ideology. It's the reason why we're trying to queer the Donbass right now. Like, I'm going to keep using that phrase, by the way, because it's a good example of this. It's the reason that we spent billions of dollars on gender programs in Afghanistan. I
think it was Pakistan, but yeah.
No, in Afghanistan as well.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
There's been YouTube videos of people that have gone over to Afghanistan post-fall, and they've seen like dumpsters filled with like binders from the State Department talking about gender programs and stuff like that because the Taliban have no need for such things. But at the end of the day, liberalism just does not tolerate, the left does not tolerate the existence of other ideologies, of other belief systems, of other cultures, of other traditions, or of tradition itself. They have no use for such things. And so this idea that it gets back to the central point that I was trying to get across in our debate. The side that wants to win will always defeat the side that simply wants to be left alone. Yep. And the reason that we lose is because conservatives, by definition, want to conserve. They don't want to advance, they don't want to impose, and they don't want to enforce. They simply want to preserve that which they think needs preserving. But what happens when there's nothing left to preserve? Well, and at the end of the day, to answer the question, you can't negotiate with these people because they literally do not believe that you have the moral legitimacy to exist within your own ideology that rejects their ideology. Their ideology must be imposed by force everywhere. It is a universalizing ideology. They tolerate no dissent whatsoever, and there's no negotiation to be had. They've told us that for years. And it's only within the last couple years, post-COVID, that I think people on the right have begun to wake up and realize this.
I think that's accurate. The one thing I will push back on is that when we talk about what do conservatives want to do, it's not that conservatives want to stay fixed in a particular place or don't want any advancement. What it is conservatives want to keep government within proper legal boundaries so that people can advance. We don't see government advancement as synonymous with societal advancement or individual advancement. It's actually just the opposite. This is one of the biggest misnomers, is that conservatives just want to stay fixed in their little point in time. No, we believe that free people working in voluntary cooperation are the ones that actually advance society in positive directions, in large part because they're free to try things and do things. But most importantly, they're free to do that within an environment where they can learn from their mistakes. Whereas in a government system, the politicians decide what success looks like, and then they subsidize that which they approve of. They tax, penalize, and reduce that which they do not approve of until all you're left with is them. And it's not progressive. It's the most backwards crap in history. And so that's what it is. I want to make sure that we understand that. Like, I want civilization to, quote, advance. I don't think you do that while centralizing power in the hands of a few bureaucrats and politicians. And the reason why I don't think that works is because the 20th century gave us the best, examples of it in world history, whether you're talking about Cambodia, China, the Soviet Union, Cuba, Venezuela. Like, how many more examples do we need of centralized government power not advancing civilization in directions that we actually want to go in order to get it through everybody's head? The problem is that there will always be somebody that believes it didn't work because I wasn't in charge. It is the height of arrogance, and yet it persists. All right, let's go into our last part here. I want to go around the table here real quick, and what we're going to do is each person is going to give kind of their analysis on how do we think, now that we know what the Democrats think of Walz, now that we know what Walz actually did as governor of Minnesota, and knowing what we know about the media, knowing that he's going to be getting a bunch of softball questions from people like, again, the alleged journalist Tapper and others just like that. How do we think that this is going to impact the election? I'll start with our political prognosticator and resident historian.
I don't think it'll have almost any impact.
Right.
I know that sounds crazy to conclude that after this episode.
So do this, right? What are a couple of areas where you think it could have an impact? So like almost kind of like a best and worst case scenario for Kamala Harris.
Best case scenario, he is able to obviously hold Minnesota, but that's a requirement. I mean, again, if she's losing Minnesota, she's already lost. Best case scenario is more that he's able to help her in neighboring Wisconsin, or potentially Michigan, or potentially Pennsylvania. This is the narrative that they've been using. I don't think that's going to be the case, but that's the narrative, right? That he plays the role of what Joe Biden did in 2020. I remember when Joe Biden was the nominee in 2020, and I was thinking to myself, and all of my fellow Republicans were kind of mocking me for it, but I was like, oh, he's won. And the reason why is because Trump won by razor-thin margins in 2016 in these 3 swing states, and he was running against Hillary Clinton, an extremely unlikable candidate that had no connection to these states. Joe Biden artificially in some cases does, but the fact of the matter is that he will be able to peel off just enough swing voters to flip back Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, and that's exactly what he did. I feel quite vindicated about that prediction in retrospect. the idea is that Walz will be able to do the same thing. I don't think he will be able to, though, in part because Democrats are currently the incumbent party. They're deeply unpopular. Harris is deeply unpopular. She's probably as unpopular as Hillary Clinton is and as out of touch as Hillary Clinton is. And vice presidential picks are not as impactful as presidential nominees are. So he's not going to be able to replicate what Biden did in 2020 because this is not 2020. Democrats are in charge, and he's not Joe Biden, and he's not the presidential nominee. He's the vice presidential nominee. So that's like the best case scenario, is that he will be able to help flip these three or hold these three states. The worst case scenario is what I just predicted, that he's not going to have any impact. Usually, vice presidential nominees don't really move the needle that much. They're picked for internal party reasons, for unity, for juicing turnout, for unlocking new access to donors. Reagan picked Bush not necessarily to appeal to a broader segment of the public. He picked Bush in order to appeal to a broader segment of his own party. And I think that Harris ended up doing that for similar reasons, not for ideological reasons, but more for identitarian reasons, because the Democrats are obsessed with identity politics. So if you're going to put a, black, Jamaican, Indian female nominee, then of course you need a straight white guy as your vice presidential nominee, because that's how Democrats look at these type of things. So ultimately the TLDR is, I don't think this is actually going to move the needle that much in either direction, which is disappointing to us because it should, but it should also be disappointing to them because I don't think he's going to help her.
Okay. All right, Tina, Queen of the Bees.
I think we're in a better position now that we know that it's Walz than if it had been Shapiro. I think that their best case scenario is that they have shored up their Jew-hating vote to make sure that they didn't, anger the mob too much, the people that hate Israel. They were really trying to thread that needle, I think. And to me, that's the reason they probably did not pick Shapiro, is because he was a better pick and I would have been concerned. But it's interesting to me. I would have been concerned if he had been the pick, but he's not the pick. And they chose to let the identity politics be more important than having a really good VP nominee. He would have been very difficult for us. And they didn't choose him. They chose Walz because he's a straight white guy and he's not a Jew. And I think that is the really important part to them. I mean, the left has really started to despise Israel and despise all, what would you call them, Zionists. We're all getting called Zionists now if you're pro-Israel in any way. And so I think that they did shore up. They managed to tamp down all of the unrest over the pro-Israel, pro-Gaza. Yeah. They managed to pick somebody that didn't upset that apple cart too much. And there's still going to be, some pro-Israel people in the mix there somewhere because they have other things that are more important to them or what. But I do think it's interesting how they were willing to throw the Jewish vote overboard in order to secure and hold on to this this anti-Semitic vote that they find so valuable. And so I think that was the benefit. I think apparently he's pretty good at fundraising as well. I struggle to think that he would be better than Josh Shapiro, but who knows? I don't think that they really gain much with him. I do think that it's interesting that a poll just came out, I think it was yesterday, showing that Trump is up in the Jewish vote in New York by 3%. He was down by 3% last time around. In 2020, he lost them by 3%. Now he's over Kamala by 3%. That's a pretty big shift. And the Democrats were willing to make that trade. That's what was so interesting, is they had to know that was going to happen. And it was worth it to them because they're done with the Jews. And that's really sad.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and give my best case and worst case scenario. So the best case scenario for the Democrats on picking Walz is that essentially Kamala is not very good on the stump. And so I think they're gonna try to do kind of a basement thing with her. It'll be very, very selective, but they needed somebody that could go out there and be folksy. And so I don't think Walz is going to take the main screen, right, when it comes to interviews and things like that. But when it comes to going around, going to state fairs, when it comes to doing that, I think what they're going to do is going to take Walz. They're going to throw him into a bunch of environments where they think that he can have an impact. He is going to be very, very strict on what he can talk about. He's going to talk about being an assistant football coach. He's going to talk about, serving in the military. He's going to talk about folksy stuff, right? It's never going to be, I put tampons in boys' bathrooms. It's never going to be, we're a sanctuary state for your kid to take chemical castration medicine. It's all going to be about just being tolerant and understanding. And you know what? As an assistant football coach, I knew what it was to take a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds and focus on a common goal. And that is the sort of stuff, that is the shtick that he is going to go with at a bunch of little town halls, and they're going to focus him right in. They're going to zero him in into places like Wisconsin, places like Western Pennsylvania, maybe some areas in North Carolina and Georgia, but that is going to be his shtick. And their best case scenario is that is going to pull over some low information voters who all they got was a mailer talking about him, emphasizing these things, or they met him at a state fair and he seemed like a nice guy. He seemed like a down-to-earth sort of guy that I could vote for, right? That's their best case scenario. The worst case scenario for them is people are actually going to go out there and talk about his record, and they're going to have to answer for it. Like, it is just going to be a regular drumbeat over and over and over again. And every time he talks about National Guard service, they're going to talk about how he lied to a group of people about serving in combat. Every time he talks about, tolerant and just, being inclusive, they're going to talk about how he prioritized money for, turning Minnesota into a transgender sanctuary state for children. Because keep in mind, that's not just about passing a law. You've already got, trans activists in Minnesota saying, well, if you're going to do that, we need a lot more doctors providing trans surgeries. And so that's going to be emphasized as well. So the juxtapose with what he says versus what he's actually done is going to lead a lot of the people that maybe were willing to give him a shot, maybe hear him out. They're going to meet him at a state fair and they're going to say, well, he seemed like a really nice guy. And then they're going to come home and wait, he did what? And Democrats are going to learn the hard way. And probably, actually, I take that back. They're not going to learn. But the negative impact is going to be, once again, they tried to manipulate a voting demographic that they've largely demonized and ignored and alienated. And instead of actually listening to their concerns, they tried to prop somebody up that they thought looked like them, thought talked like them, thought did some of the same things they did, while completely ignoring some of the radical policies that have caused so many voters to leave the Democratic Party in the first place. And it's just going to solidify in the minds of a lot of those voters who are right now, they're not Republicans. They're Trump voters, right? It's going to solidify in their minds that the Democratic Party hates them and thinks they're stupid. That's the worst case scenario for Democrats, where Walz could actually be a drag on the ticket. I think the truth is going to be somewhere in between. I think there's going to be some people it works on. I think there's going to be some people that say, nope, this is just once again a demonstration that the left hates us, and the best they're willing to do is give us an astroturf, an artificial version of what they think they like, because they cannot be bothered to understand what is really on our minds. Anyway, so that is kind of our once over the world on who is the potential next vice president of the country. Tell us what you think. We want to thank everybody for watching live and for being in the comments section. Also, if you are interested in joining part of our larger online community where we continue a lot of these discussions, plus we get feedback from our audience on what sort of episodes they would like to see in the future, please go over to Circle. You'll see it in the show notes page. You can join up right there. Again, a lot of good discussions go in there on a daily basis as well. And like I said before, please head over to jeremysrazors.com. Use promo code Nick. Get 15% off your order. You're not just going to get good razors. You're not just going to get good beard oils and stuff like that. They've also got shampoo, deodorant, body wash, all the stuff you need. I don't like to go and shop, and I hate it when you run out of stuff. So it's nice when you can just order it. It shows up. jeremysrazors.com. Promo code Nick. 15% off when you buy that. It also supports this show. So once again, thank you very much for everyone who joined us, and we will see you next episode.